In fact, I think we're actually in recession, although by the time they write the history books on this era, it may be considered a depression.
Yo, family, welcome back to the channel. Aaron here from the Bitcoin Bros coming back at you with another video today. In today's video, we're going to be looking at Peter Schiff talking about what he thinks is coming next for the economy, and that is a recession or a potential even depression. He talks about what he thinks will cause this recession slash depression and what are going to be the things that lead up to it. So pretty interesting. The Bitcoin Bros don't really agree with, a depression coming for the economy, but Peter Schiff thinks there's one coming and want to share his thought perspective with you guys in the finance space. So let's go ahead and see what Peter has to say. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you agree with him? Do you disagree? Let's go ahead and check out the clip.
I think that the numbers that we get from the government are not accurate by design. So I don't really think that the economy is growing in any real sense. I think that the way they compute the numbers, I think, is deceiving. I think that for most Americans, their standard of living is declining. I don't think the economy is really getting bigger. I think we're spending more and we're borrowing more and going deeper into debt. We're paying more for everything we buy. And a lot of that consumption ends up feeding into the GDP. And so we get a bigger GDP number and we think, oh, that means the economy is growing. But I think it's all being distorted by the inflation and the debt. Meanwhile, individuals that are living in the economy are struggling. Their cost of living is going up. You have a record increase in the number of people holding multiple jobs, not just 2 jobs, but 3 jobs or more. And they still can't make ends meet. You've got record credit card debt, which is now over $1 trillion, first time ever. And we almost have $2 trillion in student loan debt. I mean, that has just exploded. And all sorts of debt. If we really had a growing economy, people would be getting out of debt. Right? Well, that's what happens when you're doing well. You pay off your debt. You build up your savings. The savings rate has collapsed in the last couple of years. That's not a sign of economic strength. That's desperation. People are tapping into whatever savings they have left just to make ends meet. If you look at Joe Biden's popularity, he's as unpopular as any sitting president since Jimmy Carter. Wow. So, that's quite a feat. But if you remember, when Jimmy Carter was president, things were pretty bad, right? You had, the misery index, high inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment. You have to go back to that time period to find an incumbent president this unpopular. So what does that tell you? Because normally, you vote your pocketbook. If the economy were really strong, voters wouldn't care if Biden was falling asleep at meetings or, couldn't remember, who he was married to or where he was giving his speech. If people were feeling good about themselves and their economy, they would credit Joe Biden. The fact that he's so unpopular is more a function of how bad the economy is. And no matter how much he wants to pretend that it's doing well, the poll numbers display the opposite, and so does everything else with economic reality. I mean, we have record budget deficits. If times were good, the government would be running smaller deficits. They would be collecting more taxes. They wouldn't be spending as much on government assistance. Our trade deficits are at record highs. If we had a booming economy, we'd be making more stuff. We'd be exporting that stuff, or we'd be importing less because we would just consume what we produced ourselves. But our economy is really shrinking, and that's why we're on life support. We're dependent on foreigners for all the goods that we can't produce, and we have to pay for it on credit because we don't have the real incomes or the savings to afford it. Bonds now are at their highest yields since before the 2008 financial crisis. If you look at the yield today on a 30-year Treasury, it closed at 4.7%. Now, that's still a very low yield, but again, we haven't had yields this high since the 2008 financial crisis. The yield on the 10-year is 4.56. Now, we're getting very close to 5%, which is still a low rate, but most people might not recognize this. But the last time the 10-year Treasury yielded more than 5%, it was 2001. And the yield got to like 5.2 or 5.3, so it barely got above 5%. We are almost there. Now, there's a big difference because back in 2001, I think the national debt was 7-8 trillion. Now it's 33 trillion. We have a lot more debt now than we had back then. So this is a much bigger problem, a 5% 10-year. I mean, we're not there yet, but at the rate we're going, we will be there soon. And what nobody seems to appreciate in the financial media is they are looking at the beginning of the end of this whole phony economy, because the economy is built on a foundation of cheap money. It's not just the economy, it's every facet of it. The government, the deficits, the government budget is built on cheap money. And it's not just the federal government that's been gorging on this cheap money. A lot of the state governments, municipalities, they've all issued a tremendous amount of debt over the last 15 years. That's about how long interest rates were at zero, except for the last year. Again, remember, what was everybody saying when money was cheap? Great time to borrow. Take on debt. It's cheap. Borrow. Everybody borrowed because it was so cheap. And what was I saying for years? This is a mistake. I said just because it's cheap doesn't mean you should do it. My analogy was, should you do heroin if it's free? Oh, look, I can get all that free heroin. How can I pass that up? No, just because it's free, it doesn't mean you want to inject it into your body, because eventually it's going to cause a problem. And that's exactly what's happening now. I knew that all that, cheap money would come back to bite the people who borrowed it, because eventually interest rates would go up and the debt would still be there. And then what would they do? Well, we're going to find out, because it is a disaster in the making. How can the banks survive? The mortgage-backed securities are imploding. We got a small taste of it when we got the bankruptcy of a few banks earlier in the year. It was March or so, when we got three banks, the Silicon Valley Bank or Signature Bank, or those the banks that were lending to crypto. They went down. But I said at the time that what happened with these banks is a problem for all banks, because they all loaded up on mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. Again, I don't think anybody other than me, because I never heard anybody saying that stuff, but I was warning for all the years that everybody was saying how great it was that Americans could refinance and lock in these low rates. I was the only one saying, yeah, but what about the banks? What about the lenders who are stuck with this paper? It's a negative sum game. The borrower's gain is the lender's loss. I was saying, what happens when interest rates eventually go up? The borrowers are sitting pretty because they've got these cheap loans. The lenders are broke because they've got all these underwater assets. They own mortgages or treasuries that have collapsed in value, rendering them all insolvent. That's why when I was talking on my podcast, people would call me up, should I buy a house? I would say, well, just make sure you get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, because at the end of the day, that's going to be your biggest asset, your mortgage, because it's going to be your bank's biggest liability. So all these banks are insolvent. We're about to see another wave of collapses.
And thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you like that one, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more videos. We have new ones coming out every single day. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I'm out. I'll see you guys in the next one, and have a great rest of your day.